50 years ago, the summer of 1976 became the one we never forgot. Since then, that extreme heat has been superseded. In this show, we will learn about the science behind forecasting future heat waves. Hello, I'm Clare Nasir. Welcome to Climate Conversations. "50 years ago, June 1976, the clouds simply didn't turn up. Day after day, week after week, the heat held above 32 degrees for 15 days in a row, a run we have never matched before or since. It peaked at 35.9 in Cheltenham. Rivers dwindled, reservoirs cracked open, standpipes appeared in the streets, and the government appointed a minister for drought. Now Alex Deacon tells the full story of that extraordinary summer, the summer the rain forgot, a great watch on our YouTube channel.
The summer of 1976 wasn't just hot, it was exceptional.
But half a century on, 1976 leaves us with a bigger question. Back then, 40 degrees in Britain was unthinkable. In 2022, we reached it, 40.3 degrees, the first time on record. So this show sets out on a journey from 1976 to today and on to the summer of 2056, 30 years from now. And we'll be asking these simple things: how hot, how long, how often? What does a British heatwave become as our climate continues to warm? At the heart of it is our forecast for 2056, a plausible forecast for a summer's day 3 decades away, built from the most detailed climate models we have and the expertise to analyse them. In a moment, Alex Birkhill will be talking to Dr. James Pope, who led the team that created this future heatwave scenario. The forecast is only the beginning. Knowing what's coming is one thing, getting ready for it is another. And that is the work scientists like Professor Hayley Fowler are doing right now, turning these projections into the choices that keep us safer. And we will hear more from her later in the show. So for now, let's take that journey from the legendary summer of 1976 all the way to 2056. Over to Alex and James.
Now, James, thank you so much for joining me on Climate Conversations today. What we're looking at is marking 50 years since that historical summer of 1976 by doing something unusual. And you've looked at a forecast for 30 years in the future. That's right, isn't it? 2056.
Yeah.
Now, why were you asked to do this?
So I first helped produce some future forecast work back in 2020. So first worked with Aidan on a forecast back then. And since we've also done some work with BBC Sport, looking at how sport will be influenced in the 2050s by climate change, and also did some work with Wimbledon as well. So we produced these little video forecasts based on the UK climate projections, so it's UKCP, and we found out we could actually take the climate model projections and actually load it into the Met Office's software for putting out the weather forecasts. So that enabled us to produce the excellent graphics we have that everyone is used to on day to day, that we put out as the Met Office, and put that into a climate context.
But let's be straight. When we're looking at a forecast for 2056, we can't forecast the weather for a specific day or anything like that in terms of the same way that we can forecast for tomorrow. It's quite different, isn't it?
Oh, it's very different in some respects, but also very similar in others. For decades, the Met Office has had a philosophy of the unified model, that are the core of how the Earth's atmosphere and the Earth's physics around that is represented, is the same whether you're using the weather forecasting model or doing climate projections. The really big difference comes in how we drive those forecasts. We ingest something like 200 billion observations a day into the weather forecasting model, and that allows us to see how the atmosphere is evolving sort of hour to hour through the day and over those next few days. The climate model, we use scenarios which suggest how much greenhouse gases will be released over the coming century or so, and we drive the whole climate model all the way through with that one set of forcing. So we're not updating the climate model with what we're seeing day to day.
And what's different about this forecast to many other ordinary climate projections that we have?
I would say that the majority of the time when we work with climate projections, we do lots of averaging. So we'll look at what the average June might look like over some period in the future, or we'll look at the changes in annual rainfall, those sorts of climatological averages. But there's a growing interest in a range of sectors, such as like insurance, finance, infrastructure, and also in the development of what we call event sets. So that is actually looking at specific events that happen within the climate model.
I see. Now, all of this sounds like quite a daunting task, looking 30 years into the future. Where did you begin? How did you start?
So within the Scalable Climate Services project here at the Met Office, we're looking to develop ways of engaging different customers and different users with climate projections to start conversations within their organisations. A member of my team, Emma Harris, has been leading a project to develop climate narratives, short, punchy documents which are rooted in a real-world event, such as the 40-degree day we saw in July 2022, or a hot and dry summer like 2018, or even 1976. We then find out how those sorts of events look in the future as part of a fact sheet to start conversations in these organisations so they can explore what the risk of climate change is to them and their business. Emma was able to therefore repurpose the code she'd written to find these events, to find heat waves, and that provided us with our foundation for this work.
Okay, now trying to keep it into plain English that makes it easier for most people to understand. What exactly went into this forecast?
So to make this forecast, we started with a brief. We were looking for a global warming level, so that's the average global mean temperature being 2.5 degrees above the pre-industrial. So the pre-industrial we define as 1850 to 1900, so we're looking for 2.5 degrees of warming above that point. So that was part one. Second part, we wanted high temperatures in the south and the southeast of the UK, but we wanted with peak temperatures of around 40 degrees Celsius, but we also wanted that heat to expand across the whole country. And finally, we wanted a reasonably decent length event, equivalent to 1976, of around about 14 or 15 days. So that was our brief that we had to start with. Emma found a whole series of events using her code. I took an alternative approach to find events using UKCP's user interface, which is a free online tool that anyone can access. And I averaged the temperature over London to find possible events there. Emma and I pooled our events, and then we started finding which ones would work. We had 25 possible events from 16 different versions of the climate model. And as we went through each of those, we started throwing out the ones that were too short, the ones that were just focused on the south of England and didn't have that sort of national impact. And then finally, we came down to having 2 or 3 possible events. And we focused on one that we felt could tell the nicest story.
And doing all that, why does that make your findings and this forecast more credible?
The first future forecast we did, which was set in July 2050 and recorded in 2020, I think I came from it the perspective I was excited to see, could we put the climate model data into the Met Office's visualization techniques? And I was kind of mostly sort of geeking out on the technical element as much as the climate communication element. And then I realized how powerful the technique could be once we started actually sharing the video. So this time around, and as that time around, I really wanted to make something that felt like a real event. So I think the big part of that is about how we set it up in terms of the dynamical situation. So by that I mean the distribution of the high and low pressure. So in this scenario, the video that Aidan produced, we have a high pressure in the North Sea, and that is bringing hot air that has built up over the European continent and sort of shoveling it slowly into the UK. It lasts about 2 weeks, so what happens is that heat spreads across the whole of the UK, and that high pressure sort of wobbles around a bit in the North Sea, which changes the wind direction subtly day to day, which means that the high temperatures in one day are sort of closer to Wales and southwestern England, other days they're closer to London and the south and the east of England. It all feels very natural, and then towards the end of the forecast, that high pressure drifts away to the North Atlantic. We get a north and northeasterly flow, and that brings temperatures back down to much more usual summer temperatures. And that creates a narrative which I think matches to what people are quite used to. And in fact, it's not immensely different to what we've seen just a couple of weeks ago at the end of May, which again saw a high pressure in and around the North Sea that eventually broke down, and we ended up in a cooler set of temperatures after quite a significant and notable heat wave.
So that's the setup, the lead to this hot spell in 2056. But how long does it last? How intense is it? What's the impacts? And how does that contrast to what we've seen in our records so far?
So in this example, the heat waves lasted about 2 weeks. The forecast video starts about 9 days into that event, and Aidan sort of will show the last 4 or 5 days of the event. This is the peak of the heat wave, and a peak temperature of about 44, 45 degrees starts to come through. I think it's on the second day, and then it tails off. But we've actually come into this forecast already having had 4 days over 40 degrees Celsius. And that's what makes this different to what we're currently experiencing. We've seen 1 day at 40 degrees in our current climate, but in our future climate, we definitely could experience more days over 40 degrees, potentially in the same heatwave event.
Which is exceptionally hot and would cause significant problems to many people, especially those above 40 Celsius temperatures, but even high 30s for several days is going to be ridiculously hot and unpleasant and difficult. So this brings us on to a really good chance to look at that forecast that you talked about. Here is Aidan with that all-important 2056 forecast.
Hello, it's Thursday, the 22nd of June, 2056. And it has been another exceptionally hot day across the United Kingdom. The hottest place, Chelmsford, at 42 degrees Celsius, making it the 4th day in a row with temperatures somewhere in the UK in excess of 40 Celsius, and the 9th day over 37 Celsius. And despite the clear skies, tonight will bring little relief. After a week of tropical nights somewhere in the UK, another is expected tonight. That means that for parts of northwest England into the south of England, South Wales, temperatures won't drop below 20. And after another widely dry and sunny day tomorrow, temperatures will quickly rise through the morning, leading to the peak of this current heat wave. By the afternoon, we're talking about temperatures in Northern Ireland, Scotland, Northern England, reaching the mid to high 30s. The rest of England, as well as Wales, likely to reach 40 Celsius or higher. The most intense heat is expected from Bristol through the M4 corridor and north towards Birmingham, with the risk of 45 degrees Celsius. Whilst heat waves have become more frequent in recent years, these values remain extreme and dangerous. The Met Office has issued a red extreme heat warning. This means that the risk is not just confined to vulnerable groups. It is dangerous even for those who are fit and healthy. Daily routines and working practices will need to change. There's also the potential for disruption to power, water, gas, and mobile networks, along with travel disruption. And as we have already seen in past events, there is an increased risk of water safety incidents. With vegetation tinder dry, the wildfire risk is also continuing to rise. So, if you can, stay safe. Drink plenty of water. Avoid the sun during the hottest part of the day and keep your home as cool as possible, closing curtains during the day and allowing the air to circulate overnight. Into the weekend, the high pressure driving this heat wave will begin to slip away. As it does, winds will shift. And that means the focus of the hottest conditions will move across the UK. Even so, from East Wales into the south and southwest of England, temperatures will still reach 40 to 42 Celsius on Saturday, with mid to high 30s likely elsewhere. And with the solstice having just passed, the sun remains at its strongest, so in sheltered spots it will feel exceptionally oppressive. By Sunday, similar temperatures again, a peak of 42 Celsius towards the south and southwest. Finally, it turns cooler in the north at least on Monday, but for much of England and Wales, it's another 40 Celsius plus day before the heat wave breaks. Whilst there is the chance of some light rain in northern Scotland early next week, for most it remains bone dry, and following a slightly drier than normal winter, water resource pressures could build in the weeks ahead, long after this heat wave ends. Now, from Tuesday onwards, temperatures finally fall back into the 20s across the UK, ending a run of 9 consecutive days with 40 Celsius recorded somewhere. I cannot emphasise enough how extraordinary this is. When the UK first recorded 40 Celsius in July 2022, it happened on just 1 day, yet it still brought widespread disruption. Wildfires destroyed 18 homes in Wennington, rail tracks buckled, travel was disrupted, and infrastructure, including the runway at Luton Airport, was damaged. The UK Health Security Agency issued its first ever Level 4 heat health alert, and more than 2,200 excess deaths were recorded. At the time, it felt unprecedented, but in the years since, we have seen far, far worse.
Thank you, Aidan. If you want to watch that video, you can find it on our YouTube channel. Now, James, let's look back at two historic events. First, the summer of 1976. We had 15 days straight with temperatures exceeding 32 Celsius, a record that still hasn't been broken. In comparison, looking to 2056, how does something like that compare?
1976 will, I think, remain an important event in our climate. I think it stands out that while it was very hot over the British Isles, actually much of the rest of the northern hemisphere of the world was quite comparatively cool. When you compare it to more recent heat waves such as 2018 or 2025, what you see is the UK is warmer than average, but also the rest of the northern hemisphere is, and a lot of the rest of the world. So that is the big perhaps difference. But looking at it as like an event in the UK, it really stands alone. The combination of severe droughts and high temperatures brought a wide range of impacts, and hopefully we wouldn't ever see those sorts of impacts again. That event lasted 2 weeks with temperatures over at least 28 degrees, and a lot of the country seeing temperatures of 30 degrees and several standout temperatures around 35 degrees. Ed Hawkins at the University of Reading has done some analysis that shows that if we had a 1976 event in our current climate, those temperatures could be 3 to 4 degrees warmer in the south of England and in Wales, and 1 to 2 degrees warmer across much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of Northern England. So already standing alone, just with the warming we've had, 1976 would be warmer in our present day. Research has been done by colleagues at the Met Office using a technique to explore ensembles of climate models, so a group of climate models run over the recent past, suggests that equivalent heat waves now, with days over 28 degrees, could actually last as long as a month in our current climate.
Oh, wow. Okay. That would be a long that would be a long period of talking about a heat wave. When you think, even if it's 5-6 days, that's long at the moment. So for a month, that is pretty exceptional. I think we'd get pretty tired of it. The heat would be uncomfortable and oppressive, and people would struggle to sleep and get on with things. So, and I'm trying to just grasp that. So a month we could see temperatures above 20 Celsius. Is that right?
Yeah, we could see days over 28 degrees lasting for a month. Based on this analysis, it's that would be, again, that sort of level of extreme event, but it's possible within our current climate as we've set it, as it's currently set up.
Which would cause significant problems, and people would be complaining left, right and centre. I think even the people that enjoy the heat would get tired of it with temperatures that high in a country that just isn't built for those kind of high temperatures to last that long, especially if they're in the low, mid, high 30s as well, which they would be at times when generally temperatures are staying above 20 Celsius. But we have seen temperatures above 40 Celsius, thinking back to 2022. What were the odds in 2022 of us getting above 40 Celsius? What were the odds in 1976? What will the odds be for 2056? How are they looking?
So using that same technique around looking at these ensembles of models, a colleague, Gillian Kay, looked at the 40-degree day. In sort of 1976, you'd be looking at somewhere around a 1 in 200 year event to get a 40-degree day. In our current climate, so if they've set this in 2023 when they were doing their analysis, it would be a 1 in 24 year event. And they've projected that there is a 50-50 chance of another 40-degree day in the coming 12 years.
So it's significantly greater than it was just 50 years ago. And
exactly.
The chances are getting greater and greater and greater.
When we look to that future forecast, the analysis that Emma did found there was 130 days that were over 40 degrees across our 16 models. So if you account for the number of days in summer, we had about 1,400 summer days, so June, July and August, simulated in those models. We found 131 days across those same models where the temperature was 40 degrees. They were distributed in different numbers across the different models, and
sure,
all the models behave slightly differently. That's why we like an ensemble, because it gives us that variety of what the climate could do. But if you just average over the whole ensemble, it's about 9% of those model summer days were 40-degree days across that whole ensemble. So,
which is a substantial amount. And that's not 9% of the years having a day above 40 Celsius. That's 9% of all the days. And so there would be multiple years and days within each year as well with temperatures that high. So that's a very, because 40 Celsius is exceptional at the moment. I mean, just going back before 2022, I didn't think we'd be talking about 40 Celsius being a reality as early as it happened. And so, yeah, because it is such a high temperature for the UK to be dealing with. Now, before we go on beyond 2056, Professor Hayley Fowler is a climate scientist at Newcastle University and also one of the authors on the most recent major IPCC report. Now, she's dedicated her career to studying how the UK weather extremes are changing and how we can prepare for what's coming up. We caught up with her to learn more.
The 1976 heatwave had quite a profound impact on the UK. I think people will remember the heatwave, particularly in the drought subsequently, through standpipes and people queuing at standpipes. And there were actually quite large water shortages, which prompted the government to, implement water rationing eventually, and then eventually standpipes came in. But there were also other effects as well. So in particular, it had quite a big effect on health and heat-related illnesses and hospital admissions. And this is obviously always particularly amongst the elderly and other vulnerable populations. There was significant crop failures as well in 1976, and £500 million worth of crops failed due to the heat and drought, which is quite significant economic costs to the nation. There's also some really interesting things that happened around wildlife as well. So there were massive swarms of ladybirds, for example, which was quite interesting. And in terms of a sort of public interest thing. But, in terms of the actual impacts, there were big wildfires as well. And these were particularly in the south, and that had long-term impacts as well on ecology in those areas. We look at lots of different metrics to measure the impacts of heat, particularly on public health. And one of the ways we measure this is with excess deaths. And so the way we do this is that we have a sort of normal amount of deaths that we expect every day based on the day of the year. We often have more deaths in the winter when it's very cold, for example, or more deaths in a day when it's very hot. And what we do is we take the number of deaths above that expected rate based on the time of year, and that tells us how many excess deaths we have in any one year. So, for example, in 2022, during the heat wave of that year, when we exceeded 40 degrees in the UK, there were over 3,000 excess deaths a day. Environmentally, there were huge impacts as well. And in particular, we've seen this emerging risk in the UK of wildfires. And in 2022, these events were prolific, and they were the worst, caused the worst impacts since the Blitz in London. And the fire brigades were overwhelmed that day. And this was caused by these very dry heat events. And it wasn't just in London, though. And we've seen this emerging risk around the UK in recent years as well, particularly in the north. And particularly in 2025, we had big fires in Dorset as well. And actually, there were 17 fire services that were sent to look at to basically control one fire. And that almost overwhelmed the fire services. We're getting to the stage now where we may have fire events that overwhelm the emergency services, and they won't be able to cope. My research really looks at these changing extremes, and we work very closely with the UK Met Office and use their climate model outputs to basically see what will happen to extreme weather events in the future. And some of the things we found are really that we can expect heat waves, and particularly we're talking about very hot days here, to more than double by the 2050s. And actually, if we look later in the century and we don't do anything about reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, they triple or even quadruple right? So we get results like London, for example, could be in a heat wave for almost the whole summer, right? And that's quite staggering. And if we look at water, the other thing that I tend to look at, and we look at even if the 1976 drought happened today, and we've done some very interesting climate model simulations around this, you can see that the drought and the water deficits would be about 10% worse than they were in 1976. So that's with the warming we've already experienced, if that event was to happen today, this summer. And low flows as well get much worse in rivers. Of course, that affects wildlife. All of our British native animals, all of the actual wildlife in the rivers themselves, and also affects water quality as well. And those flows can get so low that we can't abstract them either for either agriculture or for supplies. And the Climate Change Committee, in their recent report, said that if we continue on the way we're going with climate change, we can expect there to be deficits of about 5 billion litres a day in these types of events in the summer. So the type of things we really need to be thinking about are putting resources back into building more storage, so building more reservoirs. We haven't built a reservoir in the UK since Kielder in the 1980s. There is a reservoir being constructed near Oxford at the moment, near Abingdon, but that's the first one that. And these things take decades actually to produce. So we need to be thinking about storage. We need to be thinking about reducing leakage as well. We lose about nearly 20% of our water through leaks. So at least the major ones we need to be thinking about reducing. We need to, as people, actually be thinking about reducing our water use. And this is particularly important with hot weather because water demand goes up as well with hot weather. And so we're not just reducing the supply in the future, we're actually increasing the demand as well as the hot weather increases. And I think the other thing is water transfers as well. But what we can expect from the future are not just these prolonged events like 1976, but we can also expect more of these short, sharp shock heat waves like we saw last summer in 2025, but also in 2022 as well. And these events can cause major problems with water demand, and this reduces pressure in the water system. And we see scenes like we saw in May this year already with standpipes in certain parts of the country when the pressure drops below that can actually supply water.
Thanks again to Hayley. Now, finally, James, looking beyond 2.5 degrees, if we didn't hold the line, what does a 3-degree world hold, a 4-degree or even a 5-degree world hold? What could they mean for our British summers?
So in May of this year, the Climate Change Committee released the Climate Change Risk Assessment and the Well Adapted UK report, and the Met Office had quite a bit of involvement in those and supported their production. The Well Adapted UK report really looked at how we should be preparing ourselves for 2 degrees and starting to plan for this world of 3 or degrees or warmer into the future. A lot of those things focused on the need to consider how we shade buildings, for example, and make our homes more habitable. Is that with additional trees and foliage? You can grow vines and bushes on the outsides of houses to sort of reduce the direct sunlight onto them. Outside of that, there's a whole range of raft of infrastructure that needs to be considered. We saw in July 2022 that Luton Airport's runway started to melt when the temperatures reached 40 degrees and flight operations were suspended. We had to have slowdowns across the rail network. We know that there were issues with power distribution. Some areas saw loss of power and due to failures of the network. So these are all areas that we have to try and support. And that's work that we do with the Met Office, particularly within our scalable climate services work. We're looking to see how we can support infrastructure, so energy and water sectors particularly, but also working with like financial services sector to try and help and explore both the likely near-term risks over the next 20 to 30 years, but also what could happen as we go beyond 2050 towards the end of the century.
So it's nice to know that people are looking ahead and thinking of the possibilities, because I always think, plan for 2 degrees, but prepare for 4, which is sort of a worst case scenario, but it could perhaps be even hotter than that. And it's good to hear about the potential for precautions and measures. I like the idea of growing more trees and plants upside of buildings because that works in two ways, doesn't it? It helps provide some shade and also then the knock-on effect of carbon as well. But is there anything else that could be done more, that you think that bigger steps could be taken?
The obvious one, of course, is that we control how warm it's going to get, because we, as a global society, will decide how much greenhouse gases are emitted. And every single greenhouse gas that isn't emitted, every small amount will make a difference. It might only be fractions of a degree, but every fraction of a degree, when you add lots of them together, start to make some really big numbers and start to make some really big changes to what we're going to see, particularly that later part of this century.
I think that's really important and sometimes gets lost. With all that, we can talk about climate change and the impacts that it's having, but people sometimes struggle to feel how they are able to make a difference. And you're right, it all adds up together. And whilst an individual on their own, the difference might be small, but when you add it all together, it makes a bigger impact.
I do try and think about sort of what I'm doing in my day-to-day life. So, you know, I try and minimise the amount of driving I do. I cycle all over Exeter, with and without family. And just sort of to get around, just to try and save car journeys and things like that. But it also helps me, it keeps me healthier, keeps me fit. I play a lot of sport, so I use it also to make sure I'm feeling nice and fit and keeping a baseline for when I'm not able to get on a squash court or hit a table tennis ball.
Nice. I think it's great when you practice what you preach, and as much as I've seen you cycling around town many times, and so I can vouch for you. You do cycle lots of places, so that's really good. Thank you so much for coming on Climate Conversations today, James. It's been a delight talking to you, and the work that you've done on this 2056 forecast, really fascinating, really interesting, and good luck with everything going forward.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Thanks
as well to Professor Hayley Fowler and also Aidan. From Claire and me, thank you so much for watching Climate Conversations.
Thank you to our guests, Dr. James Pope and Professor Hayley Fowler. And thanks to you for watching this show. There are many more Climate Conversations on the Met Office YouTube channel. See you again soon.